having me. Thank you for bearing with me. Last one of the day. My name is Aline Bougard. I work as a cultural and social strategist at draftLine, which is AB InBev's in-house creative agency. And I like to focus on Gen Z culture and Metaverse projects. So today, I'm going to talk you through a little keynote that I did recently that looks at how brands can effectively target Gen Z within this huge emerging space. And the reason I like to focus on Gen Z specifically when it comes to trends coming out of this sector is because I think it's all well and good to understand the metaverse and NFTs, but we have to remember that it is Gen Z who are driving digital culture and platform growth. So what I like to do with the brands I work with is just make sure that they aren't learning about this tiny proportion of the population who are financially capable of buying NFTs or are able to get into these really exclusive communities. I want us to learn about how this stuff is going to affect mainstream young people and their future, because it really is them who are going to be kind of living with all of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the session into 3 sections. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the metaverse, just to make sure everyone's up to speed and on the same page. And I know you might have heard a lot about the metaverse in the last year, so I'll keep it really brief, but I think it's important to have a good foundation of knowledge before we get into the fun stuff, which was what I'll do next. I'll do 2 topics. I'll cover 2 topics from which I think the most kind of interesting trends and innovation are happening. So the first being fashion and virtual identities, and the second being digital spaces. So in the spirit of wasting no time, because there's a lot to cover, I'm just going to dive straight in. It's likely you've heard the term metaverse a lot in the last 18 months. It's probably the buzzword of last year. But I think even after all of that, it's not easy to be completely clear on what it actually means or entails, and that's totally okay. So what I want to establish first, and I think it's something good to keep in mind at the top, good to keep in mind as we get into this session, is put very simply, the metaverse is the future of the internet. If you come away with one thing, let it be that. The metaverse is just the future of the internet. However, if we wanted to dive into a little bit more granular detail, you could also define the metaverse as a network of decentralized, interconnected, and interoperable spaces within both the digital and the physical realm. And I think what can help make this definition a little more digestible and useful is also establishing what the metaverse is not. So it's important to note that a lot of us have been sold this idea of the metaverse as Ready Player One or The Matrix, and you'll plug in and you'll live this fantastic life as your avatar. But the metaverse is not a singular place or world or platform. Like I said, it is the next step in evolution of the internet. And as we know, the internet isn't a place, it's a network. So all of these worlds, the Robloxes, Decentralands, Pokemon Go, none of them are the metaverse. They're more like the next step up from websites. And they make up the metaverse like websites make up the internet. But they're obviously a little bit different in how people will be able to experience, travel, and use assets across them. And I'll get to what I mean in just a sec. The last thing I want to note here in what it is not is that I think a lot of people think the metaverse is going to be fully virtual, fully digital, but that isn't the case either. We're heading towards a future where the physical and the digital, they'll converge very seamlessly, to the point that there are researchers like Kathy Hackle who are calling it the era of the phygital. So, if the metaverse is building on what the internet is today, what is it that actually makes it different? What are its differentiating characteristics? Well, it's all of these and then some. I bet there's a lot more. But what I'm going to dive into is 2 that I think really explain how we've not quite reached the metaverse yet. So the first is that it's limitless. So the metaverse will be without any cap to users, experiences, or worlds, and everyone will be able to be a part of an event, a place, or an activity together. And today, our tech, our devices, our Wi-Fi speeds, they're just not ready to achieve this. And the second point I want to draw out is that people's vision of the metaverse really depends on it being interoperable. So to create a metaverse worthy of the name, rather than just a collection of separate 3D spaces, platforms need to be interoperable and seamless. So by that I mean it'll have to be possible to retain and use the assets that you've created or bought, no matter where you are in the metaverse. And currently our digital world works where you have different accounts, different data for every single platform that you're on, and there's really no way to truly own your digital content. And that's what the metaverse aims to change. So if we're not here now, if we're not there yet, why are we all of a sudden talking about the metaverse so much? I think it's because over the past few years, we've seen like a slow but steady acceleration in innovation around virtual reality, augmented reality. We've seen the proliferation of gaming platforms as social and cultural destinations, and importantly, of course, is the emergence of NFTs and blockchain within the mainstream. So the necessary tech is getting invented slowly, but eventually it is going to get adopted, which is a nice little way to get into this bit. NFTs and why they're so important. And I know everyone's seen it, so again, I'm going to be super brief. But to cover the basics, an NFT stands for a non-fungible token, and in technical terms, that means a unit of data stored on a blockchain to certify ownership of a digital asset. And non-fungible, that just means when something is unique and can't be replaced with something else, like a Picasso. A Picasso is an example of being non-fungible. But basically, all you should remember is that NFTs are unique digital goods. And it might be weird to think of any of these as unique because they're digital. So you and I can just like go in and screenshot or right-click to save any of them. But it's the blockchain that replaces kind of the physical attributes that make a Picasso unique, for example. So blockchains like Ethereum and Solana, they act as ledgers of every single transaction ever made, and it is constantly updating itself and sharing itself with millions of other people whenever an item is created, bought, or sold, which is why it's basically impossible to trick or forge. I couldn't claim ownership of a Bored Ape if I screenshotted it and saved it, because there would be no proof of my purchase and ownership on the blockchain. So that's like the main mechanic you should remember when you think of an NFT. And like I said, there's a lot more you can get into when it comes to that topic. For the purposes of this session, I'm just going to keep it relatively brief and just ask you to think of them as the core enablers of the metaverse. And the reason for this is because NFTs are challenging the concept of ownership. Through the blockchain, we finally have the technology to own digital goods. And if we're going to be spending more and more time in kind of augmented and digital spaces, if this is where we're going to be socializing and hanging out with our friends, then it is necessary that we have the means to own digital goods. And some people are saying, oh, this metaverse, our digital lives are going to become more important. And I don't agree with those kind of hyperbolic statements, but there are already signs that people value their digital selves much in the same way that they do their real selves. Just think about it. What matters more? What you look like on Instagram or what you look like in real life? When everything goes digital, when your friends, your job, your identity, when everyone hangs out online, your flexes will need to be digital. And NFTs will allow us to express that individuality online, and the virtual clothes and accessories we choose in the metaverse, that's going to help make our online identity feel really true to us and deepen our engagement. So fashion and art, they're vital parts of self-expression in the physical world, so why should the online world be any different? And that's a pretty good segue into kind of the first set of interesting and fun trends that I want to look at. So now we've done the boring bit, we can get into the good stuff. So there's been a huge amount of investment and innovation coming from the fashion industry in this space. And that's because they're one of kind of the first sectors to understand that for Gen Z, virtual identities are super, super important. Gamers on platforms like Fortnite and Roblox, 62% of which are aged 18 to 24, they spent $54 billion on skins, virtual goods, and extra lives in 2020. And that's predicted to grow to $74 billion in 2025. So without even really realizing it, young gamers are already very used to interacting with both fungible tokens, like in-game currencies, and non-fungible tokens, like unique skins for their avatars. And as a result, fashion brands are doing some really cool things to take advantage of that appetite. Good example is last year, Balenciaga did a collaboration with Fortnite, and I think what was really cool is they did one in the real life, but also in the video game. So the price of one of their physical hoodies in the Fortnite collection was like a chunky $725. But to buy them in Fortnite, that was around the equivalent of 18 bucks. So by encouraging young people to interact with the brand within the game, they're able to build emotional connections and hopefully maybe one day drive that real-world sale. And they can also use platforms like Fortnite as a testing ground to experiment to see what resonates before actually going on to spend the money to make the products in real life. So like I said, as a result of this investment and experimentation from brands, we're seeing a lot of cool Gen Z trends coming out of that space. And I think these are trends that will have an overall impact on how people and brands behave online. And one of these is about this. So according to a study in the UK, 1 in 6 young people say they don't feel they can wear an outfit again once it's been seen on social media. This is how you look and how you present yourself on digital platforms that's important. But obviously, this is contributing massively to the amount of waste and carbon emissions that the fashion industry puts out. So, future-facing designers are kind of starting to use AR to create these reality-enhancing digital fashion pieces for people to wear exclusively on platforms like Instagram. So DressX, which is a company that launched in 2020, they allow customers to try digital clothes on with AR, and then if they decide to buy, the customer uploads a photo of themselves on the website, and in 1 or 2 days, they receive the photo back with the article of clothing professionally edited onto their bodies, ready to post on social media. And aside from this being, I think, a really interesting way of merging the physical and the digital on platforms that people are already on, so going back to that phygital thing, I think this use of AR by fashion industry could really encourage a rush of Gen Z users to become metaverse brand creators and collaborators in their own right. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this in a bit more detail. So as we know, AR has been around for a while. Platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, they've really been integral to integrating it into people's everyday lives. And Snap was really, I think, the first one to do it super successfully. They launched a creator studio for people to learn to make filters themselves. And now over 200 million Snapchat users use AR in the app every single day. Instagram obviously did something very similar. They made Spark AR Studio, and they made it so that anyone who wanted to use a filter had to follow the user that created it. So what this did is it promoted like a wave of young users to start dabbling in this AR technology because it could potentially enable them to gain thousands of followers instantaneously. So basically, you got a whole generation of people who've been brought up to learn how to do AR in a really easy, approachable way. Mark Winkelhofer, who's a creative technologist who worked with Balenciaga, he said it's become so approachable that you can get real communities creating virtual fashion just from the basement of their own computer. So young people, they're more and more adept at AR, and they won't necessarily have to buy anything to be part of these communities or try new subcultures or explore the latest trends. You know, we're already seeing this happen in popular video games. You know, on Animal Crossing, there are fashion-hungry teens who have learned how to construct their own designer fits, mimicking runway looks and streetwear drops for their avatars. In fact, there are entire subreddits, Discord servers, Twitch streams devoted to sharing codes and creating these pools of utility and knowledge that anyone can learn from. And these are likely fans of the brands who are unable to buy into or access the products in real life. So instead, they find ways to infiltrate the brands through their avatars. And they're showing off their fashion flexes and hacks to their friend when they're hanging out online, much in the same way that you would in real life. So if we think back to DressX, who create outfits with AR, what's to stop this generation to create fakes of these outfits for their socials once they learn how to master the tech? It's going to be really easy for teens and for young people to insert themselves and experiment with communities that they normally just wouldn't be able to engage with. So what does that mean for kind of brands in general? What can we learn from this? I think one of the most important things to take away from like this big trend is how you can use this tech and this behavior to ensure your products have a place in the metaverse. You know, when you think of the metaverse, you might not immediately think of AR, but you should really consider how to use AR to start showing up in these digitally enhanced spaces. How can you take advantage of the fact that through tech, you can create new things without actually having to make any physical products? How can you use it to gather insights on your consumers and see what they might potentially be interested in? And for brands that have any kind of cultural clout, such as kind of the fashion brands we saw earlier, you should 100% be prepared for users to appropriate your product or your merch digitally, and you should plan for how you want to engage with those creators. How are you going to reward the fans that incorporate elements of your brands into their digital identities? How do you persuade them to translate that loyalty into the real world? How are you going to lend brand equity when it comes to kind of digital worlds and accessories, and how are you going to add real-life utility and access to these? So that's fashion. My last bit I want to talk about is spaces. Specifically, I'm going to look at the spaces in which Gen Z are hanging out. So where are young people actually spending their time when it comes to digital platforms, and what are they doing there? And what does that tell us about the future of the metaverse? You might have heard about kind of platforms like Decentraland and Meta and Sandbox, and they have brands like Louis Vuitton and Christie's, and they've launched virtual shops there, and they've bought plots of land for like millions of dollars. And this land rush and all this PR, it might cause us to think, oh, okay, this is where the metaverse is happening, this is where people are, and this is where they're spending their time. But what I want to note here is that I think this land grab and this PR, I think it's all a bit of a red herring, and I want us to take it all with a rather big pinch of salt. Because this is what Decentraland looks like. It's pretty basic, it's pretty underdeveloped, it's very two-dimensional, and most importantly, it only has an average of about 18,000 daily users, which means it's pretty dead. And I'm not saying that that's not going to change. Obviously, lots of brands are betting on them blowing up. However, what I want to highlight here is that these are not the platforms on which Gen Z are currently spending their time. Right now, these platforms are the remit of crypto bros, super early adopters, and very wealthy investors. So you should not fall into the trap of just focusing on these because they're getting the PR. You should be focusing on what's happening on the platforms where the majority of Gen Z are spending their time. And what are those platforms? Well, it's a surprise to no one, I think, but it's video games. So we all know about Fortnite, one of the biggest games in the world and astoundingly popular with Gen Z. There are 350 million players worldwide who have collectively played Fortnite for 10.4 million years. That's more than twice as long as humans have been on Earth. Roblox is another big one, a smaller pool of players with about 50 million daily active users, but who spend on average almost 3 hours a day on Roblox. That's 1 in 6 waking hours. Games like Call of Duty, Apex Legends, Among Us, those are the digital spaces that we should be focusing on because that is where people are spending their time. And I'm very careful in saying people, not gamers, because the term gamer is becoming as irrelevant as the term movie watcher. Even though 3.4 billion people on Earth play video games, even though the industry is larger than the music, the box office, and the sports industry combined, gaming and gamers still get like a lot of eye rolls. But currently, 80% of Gen Z in the world plays some form of video game, whether that's on their phone or the computer or console. So you cannot think, video games are right for my brand, or they're not right for my audience. If you want to future-proof yourself for the metaverse, video games are a key part in doing that. And I think a lot of brands and industries are already catching up to this. Netflix says it knows it isn't competing with HBO, it's competing with Fortnite. So, if these are the platforms, what are people doing there? How are they spending their time? Well, if you wanted to, you could break down the popularity of video games into two very binary motives. One is for the euphoria of winning, and the other is kind of for escapism. Or in even simpler terms, the games in which you kill people and the games in which you don't. Games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, they're prime examples of that former, those classic first-person shooters. And although extremely popular, as we just established, there are other kinds of video games that fall into that latter category that I want to shed some light on because I think they really challenge the idea of what people like to do in virtual worlds, and they also really demonstrate the varied interests that people who play games have. So one is Animal Crossing, as I showed before as well, but the aim of this game is to pay off your mortgage and to go fishing and to collect bugs. The gameplay is pretty mundane, free, repetitive, but it is those qualities that attract people to spend hours on it because it's like super wholesome and it allows you to get into nature virtually. Another one is Minecraft. So I know this has been around for a few years now, but it's really worth examining how Gen Z collaborate and get creative on this platform. Someone recently recreated Van Gogh's Starry Night painting entirely out of Minecraft blocks and shared it with their community. Another group is rebuilding the Earth on a one-to-one scale together, a project that's already 2 years in the making. These world-building games like Roblox or Minecraft, they really allow players to create experiences that go beyond the traditional or even intended gameplay. It could be everything from like artistic to the educational. The Sims, I think, is also super interesting. Again, quite an old game, but it racked up 1.2 billion hours of play just last year. And there's a really interesting investigation done by the New York Times that explored how the game had evolved to become this food destination for Gen Z. Because The Sims realized that the game might be the first place that Gen Z encounter new foods, especially when it comes to international dishes. So they felt like they had this responsibility to provide as accurate descriptions and experiences as possible. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about kind of this future of virtual spaces or video games. How it can bring previously inaccessible destinations or experiences to more people. Think of like bucket items lists, like seeing the Northern Lights or eating at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. experiences that aren't really accessible to most people, that could be something that brands and video games can bring to them. And final game I want to talk about is Grand Theft Auto. I'm well aware, a game in which you kill a lot of people. But even that's evolved to include more gameplay that veers away from that norm through its NoPixel server. So NoPixel is this like role-playing server within Grand Theft Auto, and you have to apply to join. And as part of this application, you have to answer questions as a character that you've chosen to play in this world. So whether that's a policeman, a gang member, or a truck driver. And I think that's pretty fascinating because you think, this is a game where anyone can go in and take on a new digital persona and kind of live this fantastic life. There are some people, though, who log in after school or after work, and they choose to work as car salesmen. So really, nothing is too boring, too mundane, or too strange anymore. So this is my last little bit. Why does this matter? I think the most important thing to remember about this is that the metaverse will be kind of explored through video games. They will be the gateway into this new world. It is through gaming platforms that the necessary tech will accelerate, and we'll see kind of the defining features of the metaverse crystallize. So we're not even close to achieving kind of all these features that the metaverse has, but you can bet that interoperability, digital identities, new devices, that will be championed by gaming platforms. The second reason is that video games really tell us a lot about what we'll be doing in the metaverse in the future. You know, it's not always going to be these enormous grand experiences like Ariana Grande concerts that millions of people attend. It's also going to be about finding the joy in the mundane and simple escapism and relaxation. So you have to decide what kind of game do you want to align yourself to, and what kind of experiences do you want to provide to its users. Final reason, final slide. I think video games are super important because they're going to start converging with other forms of media. So we've seen Netflix announce their expansion into game development. We've seen game development houses like Unreal Engine start to seep into film and TV production. So you can really bet that those kind of technologies, they will start getting used by advertising agencies. So video game fans, video game trends, they're going to become a lot more important than we're used to right now. So we just have to make sure we're keeping up to speed and know how to take advantage of the creative opportunities as they come. So that's everything. It's a lot to take in, but I hope you enjoyed it.
Aline, thank you so much. We've got time for one question before we all head off. Any questions from the room? Oh, question at the back. Give me two. Do you want me to pop your head?
Yeah.
There we go, that works. I was just filling the time more than anything else because there was a question to be asked. But I guess from the back of that, I think you're saying like the metaverse as everyone defines it is a long way off, right? But there's still something brands can be doing right now within that space.
Yeah.
And I think from my experience, the brands that are getting involved now are the early adopters, and I think we'll see that progress in the future, right?
Absolutely. I think we're around, oh, this is trippy. I think we're around the 2005 stage of where kind of social media platforms kind of we're at that wave just starting to crest. And like then, kind of the brands who got in early, who kind of started to understand how this tech was used and how to build communities on them, they're the ones that thrived. So you think like NFTs, those are pretty complex things to do just like legally. Like how does your finance team like make sure the funds go kind of to the person that gets sold on to after, all that stuff. Like if you can start practicing that now, you can be sure that you're going to be like a lot more confident when all of this stuff actually really starts taking hold. And yeah, video games as well, start thinking about the experiences that you can make, because that's going to tell you a lot about like what you'll be able to do in the future on metaverse platforms.
Well, give a massive round of applause for an excellent presentation.